I'm reading from my Phantom Army of Civil Wars and Other Southern Ghost Stories. I'm reading from Georgia's Supernatural Sites. July 1996. Visitors to the Peach State have taken a whole host of supernatural sites, from haunted mansions to Georgia's own version of Stonehenge. Many of the founders of Atlanta lie beneath a canopy of majestic oak and magnificent branches in the city's oldest public cemetery. In 1850, city officials purchased 6 wooden acres on the outskirts of the city to be used as a cemetery. It was named Oakland, after the street that ran along its main entrance. The remains of many of those buried out were removed to the cemetery, which soon became a standard final resting place for the city's most prominent citizens. Peculiar taste of some more eccentric Atlantans are reflected in the elaborate monuments, headstones, mausoleums that fill Oakland. A large stone memorial decorated with Egyptian symbols stands guard over one family's plot. A mausoleum built to look like a Gothic castle, complete with gargoyles and stained glass windows, contain the remains of another family. In one of the cemetery's newer and more conventional plots lie the remains of Margaret Mitchell, the author of Gone with the Wind. But it is near the center of the cemetery that the restless dead occasionally make their presence known to visitors. General W.T. Sherman captures the Atlanta with a turning point in the Civil War. The siege of the city was like the war itself, brutal and bloody. In the heat of the battle, thousands of soldiers were buried in the shallow pits. The ridge formed by the makeshift graves ringed the city after the war in 1872. Hello, Vince. The body of 3,000 to 4,600 military dead were reburied in Oakland Cemetery. Among the sea of small slabs marking the tombs lie graves and unidentified soldiers. A granite memorial to the unknown Confederate dead, based on the line of Lutheran guards that section of the cemetery. The memorial is a massive statue of wounded lions lying on a furled Confederate flag. It is here, near the memorial, that the visitors repeatedly have reported hearing a somber roll call, a voice not of this world, calling out the forgotten names of those who died. The cemetery, now ringed by a brick wall, lies in the heart of Atlanta. The city downtown skyscrapers are visible from many spots of the cemetery. Oakland Cemetery is open to the public 7 days a week, and tours are offered on a regular basis. In Buford, a rural town on the fringes of metropolitan Atlanta, stands the old telephone building, as it is known to residents. The brick one-story building was built on the site of the house occupied by Jim Lights in 1930. Lights has long been dead, and the building now houses offices, but the ghost of the previous owner is still hanging around. For years, workers in the building have reported ghostly manifestations, sounds of footsteps when no one is there, slamming doors, office equipment that turns itself on and off, and a number of unexplainable noises. Lights have been seen by at least two witnesses who gave the same description of an old man of the medium height with a full gray beard. Lights reportedly died in the house. Some long-time Buford residents remember stories regarding Light's hoarded wealth, which he refused to entrust to a bank. Some Buford residents think Light buried the money on the property and still returns periodically to check on it. Savannah on the Atlantic coast is Georgia's oldest city and home to many of the state's most noted haunted sites. The antebellum mansions, draped in Spanish moss, the town's many statue-filled squares, countless beds and breakfasts in grand old homes, and a historic, bustling business district makes Savannah one of the South's most popular vacation destinations, as well as a favorite location for Hollywood filmmakers looking for a picture location that fits the image of the traditional South. The city's long history has also given Savannah a wealth of legends, many associated with the 18th century pirate who visited Savannah's bustling port. The aptly named Pirate House restaurant, which flies the skull and crossbones above its front doors, and the Shrimp Factory are two of Savannah's most popular haunted eateries. Guests at the Kehoe House Bed and Breakfast have also been known to encounter ghosts. The Kehoe House was built in 1892 by iron magnate William Kehoe. It has been used for various purposes since the family sold the home in 1930. For a time, it was a funeral parlor. Most recently, a luxurious three-story home was turned into an opulent bed and breakfast. More than half a dozen guests have reported ghostly encounters since then. All of the incidents have occurred in two rooms, 201 and 203. The patrons have reported seeing an image of a young girl dressed in servant clothes, while others have seen the apparition of an elderly woman wearing a shroud over her head. Bonaventure Cemetery in Savannah also received a burst of notoriety after being featured in John Arendt's best-selling book, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Legend recounts that the cemetery is on the site of a colonial plantation. The plantation's owner was hosting a grand party, the type for which Savannah is still known. When the house caught on fire in the middle of dinner, hosts and guests simply picked up their plates and utensils and transferred the party to the mansion's grounds. As the mansion burned to its foundation in the background, the carousers ended their meal by smashing wine glasses against a tree. Visitors to the cemetery have reported that the sounds of the revelers, as well as the smashing of glassware, can still be heard on certain nights. Just north of Dalton, Georgia, lies an almost forgotten, unnamed cemetery. Most of the graves in the cemetery date back to the Civil War era and contains the remains of slaves. Hence, it is known as the Old Black Cemetery. And while its graves are rarely visited by the living, a phantom has been repeatedly sighted by those who do come to the graveyard. Several sightings of the phantom, described as a man of medium height wearing a hood garment were reported in 1970. The phantom is reported to have chalky white face, eyes that glow like hot coal. As known, subdivisions sprang up in the vicinity of the old cemetery. Unusual poltergeist-like activity began to be reported in the homes nearest the cemeteries. Along the winding Altima River in South Georgia lies Rock Oven, a series of caves, limestone formations that once was the dwelling place of a secluded Indian tribe. The area is widely known for being home to unusual phenomena. Rock Oven receives its unusual name because of the charred soot that covers the roofs of some of the caves. The soot is one of the still visible reminders that the area was once the home to the Tama, a known extinct Indian tribe about which little is known. Other evidence of the Indian inhabitation, such as pottery shards, and arrowheads, occasionally surface in the area, as do strange reports of mysterious happenings, spook lights, disassembled bodies, voices, sightings, and spectral Indians dancing around campfires. Athens, Georgia, about 60 miles east of Atlanta, is home to the University of Georgia and many historic homes, some of them reportedly haunted. The Taylor Grady home, according to many witnesses, is visited every Christmas by an unidentified Confederate soldier and a female companion. The 100-year-old Thomas Gaworthy House, now home to a sorority, has a ghost legend associated with one of its rooms. A bride-to-be retreated to the room and hung herself after being left at the altar. She still occasionally makes appearances, according to legend. Any woman assigned that room becomes engaged before she leaves college. Even the University of Georgia President's office, located in the historic Lustrate House, is home to a ghost. This ghost, one Major Morris, is known to take a seat near the fireplace on chilly evenings. His apparition has been sighted by dozens of visitors. Near the Lustrate House lies a marker for an oak tree and curious legend. The marker denotes that spot in which once stood a majestic oak associated with the life of Robert Toombs, a lawyer, a planter, a statesman who served in Congress and the Senate. As a young man, Toombs attended Franklin College, which would later become the University of Georgia. He was dismissed from school in 1828 for boisterous behavior, but returned at the next commencement day and delivered a speech so eloquent that his entire audience of the commencement exercise left the ceremony to listen. He spoke under the shelter branches of the great oak. Legends say that on the day Toombs died in 1885, the great oak at which he first came to prominence was struck by lightning. The dead tree finally collapsed in 1908 and was cut into small fragments that have been passed down from generation to generation of University of Georgia alumni ever since. A marker was erected on the site of the old oak by the State General Assembly in 1985. One of Georgia's most unusual sites has relatively modern origin. This is Georgia's Guidestone, the monolithic formation near Elberton, a small community about 75 miles northeast of Atlanta. The Guidestones are a series of granite pillars 29 feet 3 inches tall and weighs 28 tons. They form an X pattern. The stones are astronomically aligned so that the rising and setting sun shines through a window in the center stone. Etched on the guide stones are 10 commandments or religious tracts written in 12 languages, including Sanskrit and ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. The guide stones were designed and paid for by an unidentified man using the pseudonym Robert C. Christian in 1970 or 1980. There are conflicting reports who Christian was and why he had guide stones erected remain the subject of much speculation. The site upon which a formation was built is near Ali'alohi, the center of the universe according to Cherokee Indian legend. No one is sure if the guide stones were purposely built near the Cherokee location, but occult powers, mysterious noises, and strange rituals have been attributed to both sites. I hear them. Hey, Crook, Kitty Crook, what are you doing? You're sitting on Callie. Lulu. Hi, Lulu.
Gary, he's not so loud.
Oh, okay. Oh. Meow. Come on. I'm going to try keeping this one up back here. Come on. One little kitty. Two little. Well, come on. Come on. Come on. Why? Come on, Wayne, girl. Get in there. Okay. Come on. Come on.
Mommy take you out of your chair again, Wad.
Yeah, I'm here. What'd you say?
You kicked him out of his chair.
Oh, well.
You're mean.
The Haunts of Hell Holler, July 1983. The remote Georgia community, named for past rowdiness, is today friendly and hospitable, but the same can't be said for its ghost. Hell's Holler is a small farming community which I gotta put my glasses on. Okay. Hell's Holler is a small farming community which begins where the paved highway ends, in a remote mountainous area of northern Georgia. The people in these backwoods communities are friendly, fun-loving, and hospitable, but the same can't be said for the ghosts who live there. On July 3rd, 1982, Clausen Payne's family was startled when he came back to the house, pale and shaken, only a few minutes after his 5:30 a.m. departure. He had left later than usual, and his wife wondered frankly why her husband, who had not missed a day of work in 15 years, was not rushing to his job in the copper mines, 16 miles away. Clausen seemed too terrified to offer an adequate explanation. He mumbled incoherently about an automobile accident, then rushed into his bedroom and closed the door against his family's almost hysterical questions. The younger children raced outside to see the damage, but expected for it usual dents and scratches. The red 1954 Ford Fairlane seemed unharmed. I was visiting the Payne's family at the time of the incident, and that afternoon when Clausen related a bizarre story of the Hell's Holler ghost pup, which he hardly hid my smile. Knowing Clausen's tendencies to exaggerate, especially after a few nips of liquor, and realizing what a kind-hearted beat beneath his rough exterior, I secretly surmised he had run over a dog and was knowing trying to ease his troubled conscience, because I was due to the house of another friend in Murphy, North Carolina the next morning. A good hour drive from Hell's Holler. I retired early that evening and temporarily forgot Clausen's strange tale. The next day dawned bright and sunny as I drove toward the paved highway. I was thinking what perfect weather it was for an Independence Day picnic. Then from the corner of my eyes I saw a small white blur darting toward the front wheel of my car. Hoping to avoid killing one of the neighbor's pups, I turned the wheel sharply and the car began to rock violently from side to side while the steering wheel spun wildly under my helpless hands. And although the temperature was climbing into the 80s, a strange loud wind came through the open window, whistled from around my head. Before I had time to think, the ordeal was over. Everything was still again. The white form had disappeared and my car was running smoothly. I brushed down my frazzled hair with trembling hands and drove on. Later that morning, I forgave my friend when she bit her lips to keep from grinning after I told her my incredible but nevertheless true story. After having dealt personally with one of the Hell's Holler ghosts, I listened more respectfully to the numerous strange accounts. When I heard about the headless body that reportedly was seen only after midnight on a certain desert gravel road, I decided to seek out the phenomena myself. On July 13, 1982, I persuaded my youngest sister, Edna Carr, an adventurous type, to accompany me. Despite our brave intentions, after we had parked, we were both too nervous to unlock the car doors and step outside. We waited in silence, the stars, peering at the stars. After an hour, we began to feel a bit foolish and agreed it was time to give up. There seemed to be no ghost. I was ready to turn the ignition key, and Edna already had closed her eyes for a nap, when an invisible heavy hand began to pound slowly and rhythmically on the roof of the car. In wide-eyed shock, we looked up to see the black flannel top of my yellow Datsun heaving up and down with every thunderous ghostly strike. "Go!" Edna hissed, too stunned to say anything more. As we roared out of the area, wheels spinning, one part of my mind persisted in arguing that somebody must have been near the car. I glanced into the rearview mirror, but all I saw was a small whirlwind of red dust and gravel stirred up by our sudden departure. The ghost that haunts this road apparently had not been pleased by two foolhardy women seek adventures. I felt extremely thankful that no headless body had materialized. My third encounter with one of Hell's Holler's supernatural beings was the most terrifying. It happened after I was sworn off ghost hunting because of the last ordeal. When an elderly family friend, a woman I knew only as Widow Sands, who had lived alone for many years in a small house in one of the remotest areas of Hell's Hollow, graciously invited me to spend a night during my visit. I willingly accepted, especially after the frail but independent lady laughingly informed me that things of another dimension were not allowed to enter her home. That night I snuggled into a feather bed and stared drowsily at the splintered, rough-hewn wall, regretting that it would soon be time for me to return to city life. In no time I fell asleep, to be awakened suddenly by a strong sense of impending peril. I groped desperately in the darkness for the bedside clock. It was 3 a.m. Now an invisible presence made itself known in the pitch-black room, emitting a vile, evil aurora. I dropped the clock and slumped back immobile, paralyzed with fear, cold sweat beating my forehead. In desperation, I tried to pray, but as soon as I mouthed the first words, a heavy weight began to press down on my body with painful force. Dear God, I prayed, sure that soon I would suffocate under the enormous weight that I could not see. I had to get to the lamps. I knew instinctively that if I could, all would be normal again. I arched my body upward with extraordinary strength, derived from sheer panic. Freed from the supernatural burden, I raced across the cool hardwood floor and flicked the lamp switch, sobbing with relief as the yellow light flooded the room. The evil fled with the darkness. In the morning, Widow Sands found me, still weeping, curled up in an armchair in her well-lit living room. She sniffed in disdain at my tail and hinted darkly that my writer's imagination was playing havoc with my sanity. During the last 2 weeks of my Georgia visit, I began to wonder if she was right. Was I so convinced of the existence of Hell Hollow's ghosts that I created their reality in my mind? No, for another sister, Margaret Ann Carr, by far the most level-headed member of our family, who knew nothing of my spooky encounter, sadly confessed to a similar experience without the crushing sensation in Widow Sands' house a year earlier to the day. On July 21st, 1981, the night of my encounter was July 21st, 1982. Legends of the ghosts of times past are still echoed today in Hell Hollers. The tale of the Ghost Rider is a favorite with trick-or-treaters, but Sue Griffith doesn't laugh with the crowd when the story is told. She heard the thunder hoofs and invisible horses, in her own words. I was 7 years old when my family lived in Hell Hollow about 1950. The main road, a one-track gravel road, ran by our house and went up a hill about a quarter mile away on an old trail called Ridge Road. Also crossed the hill. We, my brothers and sisters, and I were up on that old ridge road picking huckleberries when we heard horses rushing down the trail toward us. They sounded like a big bunch of horses, very loud and fast. We thought we were going to get run down, so we started screaming and running for home. But no horses appeared. The sound stopped before we got a few yards to the main road. Then we were really scared. I don't know what that sound was, but we didn't go back there. Casey Allen is another who shudders when she hears such tales. For she and her husband lived for a year in a Hell's Holler home, which is trouble spirits occupied one of the rooms. The day we moved in, Casey says, I wonder why the lady who had lived there before had left a rug in one of the bedrooms. Since we didn't have many things then, I was glad she did until I lifted the rug and saw the big black blood stain that didn't look like it was over 2 days old. I had heard that a man had been killed years before in the house, but because of the blood looked so fresh, I wonder what had been killed there recently. I called my husband and he figured a cat or something had been killed and the previous owner had just neglected to clean up the mess. I was pretty shook up, but then even more scared when I tried to clean up the stain. The blood wouldn't come off the floor no matter what I did. Finally, I just decided the blood had soaked through the wood floor and would dry up eventually. So I covered up the stain with a rug and tried to forget about it. We tried to sleep in the room the first night, and just about midnight the sound of dresser drawers opening and closing woke us up. The sounds kept getting louder. It was too dark to see much, but we were too scared to look anyways. We jumped out of bed and ran out of the room, and the next morning I went in, moved the rug. The bloodstain looked fresh as ever. Once we stopped going into that room, we didn't have any more problems. I don't know if anyone else moved into the house after we left. I hope has been torn down by now, because I wouldn't want anybody to have to go through what I did. The day they moved out, Casey took one last peek under the rug. The blood stain was still fresh. John Carter didn't see a ghost, but he knows firsthand why one home in Hell Holler was rumored to be haunted until the day it burnt to the ground. On a Sunday evening in 1952, John walked his wife to church, his old yellow hunting dog trailing along. Not being partial to church, John left his wife to attend the meeting while he continued to stroll the dusty back roads. I came up all at once on a house where I didn't know the people, and I heard a woman scream, "Oh Lord, oh Lord!" I ran aside, and there was an old woman, about 70 years old, carrying a lantern around and screaming. 2 men were in the room too. When I asked what was wrong, one of the men said his brother had cut himself and pointed to the bedroom. I ran in, and there was a man lying in bed with his throat cut. Blood was running all over the bed and floor. The man sitting beside the bed was holding a bloody straight razor. The man looked up and smiled, and I feared I had better run before he took after me. Sure enough, as soon as I was out the door, I could hear him breathing behind me. The man was fatter than me, and I ran as hard as I could, but he just kept breathing right behind me. I finally thought, I just can't go no more. I feared I would turn and fight the man, razor and all. When I turned, though, all I saw was my old yellow dog, his sides heaving. It was him who had been trying to keep up with me, and it was his breathing I heard. I never knew what happened at that house, and I didn't ever go back to find out. But I heard people say years later that the house was haunted until the day it burnt down. Today, many of the Hell Holler back roads have been paved, and modern homes have replaced most of the dilapidated farmhouses, but the ghost stories still circulate. I am dubious about some of them. I find it hard to believe that a man with a wicked looking jack-o'-lantern head roams the highway every Halloween. And I've heard the saga of a woman's bloody face appearing in the window when death is imminent in so many other areas that I am not convinced. That is originated in Hell's Hollow. Nevertheless, something beyond human understanding is going on at Hell's Hollow. A personal experience has made me wiser. I no longer smile skeptically at anyone halting stories of a bewildered supernatural encounter. This is still in Georgia. The ghost of Miss Mary. We were halfway down the stairs when I saw Miss Mary's ghost coming up the steps toward us. Indian Springs, Georgia State Park is the oldest state park in the nation. Many beautiful homes and hotels have been built here over the years, but none is lovelier than Rock Castle, which was built before the Civil War. In the 1930s, the castle was occupied by three elderly heirs, Miss Carrie Collier, Miss Lou Collier, and their niece, Miss Mary Cleveland. They maintain a children's library in the left living room. The young people of the village were encouraged to check out books, and my friend Eleanor Archer and I made many visits to the library. I like to visit the elderly ladies because they took us outside and explained century plants and took us why birds need a bird bath, and then they told us why birds need a bird bath, and then they always gave us a cookie and some sweets. We had learned to read before we entered first grade because of children's library. We were in third grade when a bad flu epidemic hit our town. Miss Mary's niece died within a week after becoming ill. The two aunts became sick within weeks of this loss. Miss Carrie was still up, but Miss Lou, looking very pale, lay in bed. Evelyn's mother called us in and told us we should go see Miss Lou. She cautioned us not to stay too long and to be on our best behavior. We were met at the front door of the castle by the maid and set on our way up the beautiful curving stairway to Miss Lou's bedroom. There we stood beside Miss Lou's bed holding her hand while we talked with Miss Carrie. In a short time we said our goodbyes to both ladies and started down the dimming stairway. We were halfway down the stairs when I saw Miss Mary coming up the steps toward us. I seemed to be able to see through her upper torso, but there were no mistaking her face surrounded by a white pompadour of her hair. Evelyn and I rushed for the front door. We actually fell down the front steps, got up, and ran as fast as possible to the sandbar in the small creek that cut through the park. When we caught our breath, we agreed on exactly what we seen. No words passed between us from that time. We started down the steps until we collapsed on the sand. Evelyn outran me to the spot. Miss Lou died within a few days of our visit, and Miss Carrie followed her shortly after. It was a sad time. Today, Rock Castle stands still, a shell purchased by a Georgia State Park division. That's a short story. Okay, now we're gonna go into Louisiana. That was the next one. Maryland. Okay, we're in Louisiana. Ghost of the old New Orleans jails. October 1992. Beautiful ghosts haunted prisoners, causing them to attempt suicide. Let me think. Yeah, get something munchy on. Prisoners in an old New Orleans had a lot more to worry about than just the loss of their freedom. As reported by the New Orleans Daily Tribune, on January 23rd, 1882, there had been 14 attempt suicides, most of them successful. A cell number 17, an old parish prison. Prisoners surviving the suicide attempts had babbled about seeing a beautiful red-haired woman who walked into their cell smiling. She then tortured them so terribly that they tried to kill themselves to escape. The continuing strings of suicide attempts finally caused the prison warden to stop using cell number 17. The beautiful ghost then began haunting another cell on the same floor, used by female prisoners. Within 3 months, 6 women confined to the cell had killed themselves. Several police officers at the prison reported seeing the striking apparition, who was so regaled in bearing that they call her the Red-Headed Countess. As later newspaper stories reported, there was even stronger testimony on an eerie incident occurring at the old 9th Precinct Station, which was commonly called the Carlton Jail. In the hot New Orleans summer in 1898, Sergeant William Clifton, a commander of the 9th Precinct, was visited at the jail office one evening by 2 men and a woman. As they talked, the woman leaned against the office wall and she was suddenly and violently spun into the room. She returned to the wall and again attempted to lean on it. The same instant force hurled her away. Not believing that they had just witnessed Sergeant Clifton and the other 2 men then tried to lean on the wall. Unsuccessfully, each man in turn was forcibly pushed away by something they could not see or understand. Puzzled, they stayed away from the wall. A few nights later, the patrol wagon driver, Officer Dell, lay down on the sofa against the same wall. He said the sofa suddenly moved to the center of the room and back. Disbelieving fellow police officers gathered in the room to watch as one of them laid on the couch to test the sofa, which immediately tilted and bounced the skeptical policeman roughly on the floor. After this incident, it was recalled that a man arrested for murdering his wife and boiling her body in lye had been beaten to death against the same wall by enraged policemen. Following these strange incidents, the tough and thoroughly realistic group of officers assigned to the old jail was frightened by one spooky happening after another. Following these strange incidents, the tough mounted officer Joel Aucoin entered the jail office in October 1899 and observed a framed portrait of Admiral Dewey, revolving like a wheel on the wall. On closer examination, the portrait appeared perfectly normal and was found to be hung securely. Another evening, a mirror and framed portrait of General P.G.T. Beauregard both fell from the wall, crashing noisily to the floor in front of the witnesses, with no discernible cause. On another night, the sound of heavy footprints, which one dragging foot, was heard in the jail corridor by Corporal Hyatt. No one was found in the corridor. Officer recalled that walking sound of the lame murderer recently imprisoned who has escaped. They later learned that on the same night they heard that the ghostly footsteps. The escaped murderer had been found dead in Pennsylvania. At midday the following July, the sergeant looked up to see two quadroon girls standing before his desk, smiling wickedly. Almost instantly, they disappeared in front of his eyes. The second sergeant recognized the images of those of the two women who had been hanged there for crimes of killing their lovers, whose livers they have carved out. Cell number 3 in the Carleton jail was the site of the most killing chain of events. Each time that a prisoner was placed in the cell overnight, he would be found the next morning, beaten, bloody, and near death. Each victim, dazed, scared, almost witless, repeats the same story. They all see these three ghostly men had come through the walls into the cell and battled with each other, with a mortal prisoner. Throughout the night, these men recalled that 3 murderers had once been locked up together in cell number 3 overnight, and they had fought each other viciously all night long. The next morning, 2 were found dead, and the 3rd died hours later. Numerous transfers requests from policemen stations there made staffing the 9th Precinct difficult for many years. The city of New Orleans finally had the decaying Carleton jail put down in 1937. Even then, as they raised the gallows in the jail courtyard, workmen and other witnesses reported seeing human shapes amid the cloud of dust. Green specters of every murderer who died there had returned to enjoy the final destruction of the grisly old prison.
Let me show him my back.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
You're welcome.
You put them in a bowl. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. My friend and Black Ghost Child. No one but me believed in the existence of my friend Sarah until one afternoon when she showed me a whole shed full of human bones. The most memorable friend of my childhood was invisible. I met her when my parents Bill and Jenny Pavey and I were living in an old house near Vivian in central Louisiana in the early 1930s. The house, built in the shape of the letter L, stood silhouette in the hill surrounded by barren fruit trees. A rutted dirt road led past to the hills and the forest where my father cut railroad ties for a meager living. I was only 6 years old when I was only 6 years old, but I knew from the beginning the house was haunted. Not only did it look spooky, but I felt an eerie, clammy feeling, especially when I was alone. All of us were frightened. Mama and Papa soon noticed strange going on, but discussed them guardedly. The thing that bothered us most was the rear room that had been boarded up and put off limits to us. Our aged, uncommunicative landlord explained only that the room stored personal property. This would have been quite all right, except that some of the things in storage there were noisy. A grandfather clock must have stood in the room against the thin wall of our bedroom. We never heard it tick. We never heard it tick, yet it chimed 12 times every midnight. And this chiming was followed by the sound of a rooster crowing from within the mysterious room. Otherwise, we never saw or heard a trace of him. I easily could have overlooked these things, but there was one thing wrong with the house. I could not forget. I was an only child at the time. I was lonely, and Papa often brought me pet cats, but because of the atmosphere of the house, I couldn't keep one very long. Each kitten would depart, leaving me with newly broken hearts. Then one day in 1936, a little playmate arrived to help me forget my loneliness. She was a little black girl about my age and as pretty as can be. Sarah was friendly and mischievous, to my delight and to my parents' distress, and what's more, they couldn't see her. Her invisibility to everyone except me delighted Sarah, but often proved a detriment to me, for Mama and Papa would blame me for some of Sarah's antics they didn't find amusing. For instance, one day Sarah suggested we dip Mama's snuff. She insisted a fetch it from the mantel for the fire over the fireplace and bring it to our favorite hiding place. After one dip, I wanted no more, but Sarah loved it and plopped whole spoonfuls into her mouth, not even bothering to spit. It was amazing. Soon the bottle was almost empty, and I didn't know how I was going to explain it to Mama. She and Papa got great pleasure out of their only luxury, and I told Sarah that I was in for it. Sarah just shrugged her shoulders and suggested that I mix cocoa with what was left to fill up the bottle. And she laughed. I did as she suggested. Sarah must have laughed and laughed over my being so naive. But there were fun times too. Sarah rarely came at night, but one evening she visited when we were sitting around a large open fireplace. Mama was sewing and Papa was enjoying his last pipe before going to bed. I was snuggled up the end of the hearth, watching the eerie shadows of the fire cast against the unpainted plank walls. When Sarah suddenly appeared right in front of my astonished eyes, and as usual, no one else could see her. Immediately, Sarah began running about the room, amusing herself. Without warning, she jumped impetuously out onto the back of Mama's rocking chair, giving her a quick jolt that caused her thread and scissors to slip out of her lap onto the floor. When Mama stooped to pick them up, Sarah pushed my cat's tail under the rocker. I reached down to pull the cat's tail back, but I was too late. Mama rocked back and the cat let out a spine-tingling meow. I have to admit, it was quite a ruckus. Mama spotted me reaching down and assumed I was at fault. She hit me so hard that the back of her hand, I thought my jaw had cracked. I was so mad at Sarah, I swore I'd never play with her again. But Sarah wasn't through. She went over to tease Papa, who sat taking long drags of his pipe to calm his shattered nerves. Sarah reached down and scooped up a tiny dab of sawdust from the floor near the kindling box and flicked it over Papa's pipe. The fire in the pipe spouted and Papa coughed. The pipe almost went out, so Papa took a hefty puff to ventilate it. That was a mistake, I guess. I never saw so many sparks or heard such cussing in my life. It was really a sight. Sarah was bent over, slapping her hands and legs and laughing like crazy. I got to slapping mine and laughing just the way she was. That was a mistake too. Papa got the notion I had something to do with the trick and sent me off to bed. One day when Sarah came to play, she wasn't in her usual happy mood. When I asked what was wrong, she told me to come with her to the shed on the back of the property. I was forbidden to go there, but as usual, I followed Sarah's lead. I never forget what I saw there. It was enough to scare anyone right out of their wits. A whole shed full of bones. After Sarah calmed me down, we sat on a log, and she explained that the bones belonged to her early slaves who had lived on the place, worked for the first owner. He had been very mean and killed slaves when he was displeased with them. Rather than giving them a decent burial, he had thrown their bodies into the shed in the backyard to decay. Finally, someone slew the slaveholder and relatives took over the house. The private thing now stored in the sealed room has belonged to the original owner. Sarah explained that her father had been killed by the mean man and her mother had died of grief. Sarah had died of exposure after her mother's death. That was the last time I saw Sarah. We parted sadly. She didn't want to play that day and sent me to the woods where Mama and Papa were cutting wood. I wasn't my usual self that day either, and my parents soon asked what was wrong. I couldn't hold back the truth even though I feared I might get a whooping for telling a lie. But they followed me back to the old shed and Papa peeked inside. It's the truth, he gasped. That same day we packed our few belongings and left. On the way through town, Papa stopped and asked the sheriff the truth about the old house and the bones. He told Papa the same story Sarah had told me. No one could explain how I had heard the story. I started school later that year and was delighted with a new game I devised to make spelling tests more fun. I guessed the words. I wrote them down on paper before the teacher called them. No matter how she mixed up the list, it was great fun. All I had to do was listen inside my head, but the teacher didn't think it was fun. She punished me for cheating, although she couldn't explain how I managed it. Somehow I knew my mischievous friend Sarah was involved, but didn't dare admit it. Even now there are times when I know things before they happen, but I try to turn it off because I don't want to know. I just want to be normal, and besides, I can't really trust that. The weird whistling and barking approached our camp. I switched on the spotlight and saw nothing. Noisy phantoms of the Louisiana swamps. I was coming closer. We were here, but we couldn't hear the leaves rustling close to the trail. Quietly, I climbed into the overhanging branches of a young swamp tree. In one hand, I called a powerful Navy spotlight, a war surplus job capable of lighting up the whole area. Below me, Charles Brand and two other friends were taking cover in and around the tent. We were ready to protect ourselves from whatever it was. As we waited in the pitch darkness, the whistling and the barking came nearer. Beads of perspe- perspiration trickled down the open neck of my shirt. Uh, the, the steaming heat of the swamp had not cooled, although it was 1:30 in the morning. In another minute, I thought we would get a glimpse of the thing. We came relentlessly onward through the jungle-like foliage, directly toward our camp. I held the light in readiness. We had started our camping trip early that summer morning. There were four of us, Emil, Archie, Charles, and I. It was only an overnight camping trip, but only would have thought that we were going on a safari onto darkest Africa. Judging from the large boxes of food and supplies we carried, a family volunteered to drive us a good part of the way, or I doubt if we could have made it with most of the stuff. As it turned out, we managed to haul everything deep into the interior of the vast wooded area we become so familiar with. We knew most of the trails leading in and out of the Louisiana swamp from our frequent weekend visits. When we fished or hunted wild birds and turtles, the huge palmetto plants and twisting vines that grow in the Louisiana swamplands are not unlike the tropical vegetation one finds in the African jungle. A hot sun beats down on us as we walked along the windy footpaths. We carried two 10-gallon jugs filled with water for drinking and cooking. We had filled them at a trapper's cabin on the outskirts of the marsh, and they were plenty heavy. After a few hours, we had found a suitable campsite where a small bush trail widened to about 15 square feet. The ground was high and dry and made an excellent overnight spot. It didn't take long for four of us to set up our camp. Emil and Charles started to get lunch while Archie and I took off into the thickets to gather firewood. After lunch, we went down to the little freshwater dock and tried our luck at fishing. 3 small cats were all we got for our troubles. Night was closing in when we finished dinner. Soon, a heavy blanket of fog kicked up and swirled around our feet as we walked. Crickets and frogs beginning their songs, and the night took on an air of mystery. We spent most of our evening just sitting around the fire, exchanged friendly chatter. We discussed our plans for the following days, and not long afterwards retired to our tent. Archie and Charles occupied one of the tents, Emil and I the other. Smoldering embers were all that remained on the fire when Emil and I awoke. Simultaneously, the mosquitoes were out in force, and the heavy netting we had hung around the door didn't allow much of the night air to enter. Consequently, the heat added to our discomfort. Both Emil and I lay there in the darkness, smoking and talking softly so as not to wake the others. Suddenly the silence was broken by a wailing and barking of what sounded like a large dog some distance away. It struck us as odd that a dog should be in the vicinity, but we dismayed it and continued our conversation. Then, from the same direction came another sound of a man whistling. It was a tuneless sort of sing-song. Weird to say, at least it startled us. A few minutes later we heard it again, this time closer than before. Again it came still nearer. Neil and I decided to wake the others. We all sat together in my tent and listened. There it was, clear, unmistakably, and growing louder. Twigs and brushes began to rustle. Charles and Archie grabbed their guns. Emil took up his axe, and I reached for a spotlight and made for the door. Outside, the stillness of the night was almost a tangible thing. We spread out around the camp, and I made my way over to the trees. All the while the sound came closer. Now I thought, it is within a few yards of us. I waited for a moment, making sure of the direction, then threw the switch of the big light. It was almost as if the sun had come out, but there was nothing there to be seen. Thinking I had jumped the gun and missed him, I turned off the light. Darkness rushed in like water filling the hole. My spine chilled, and the hair on my back of my neck began to tingle as once again the whistling pierced the night, this time from almost directly beneath me. Light swept over the entire area as I played the beam back and forth across the shadows, straining my eyes to see where the sound were coming from. As far as I could see, there was nothing. We began to shout, to yell threats. There was no answer. Only the eerie sound of the ghost-like whistle and the rustling of the bushes broke the stillness. Go away from us now. We sat quiet, unmoving. The sounds did not stop, but rather faded slowly into the distance. Just as they had approached from the distance, it was almost as if the ghostly hunters and his dog had passed through our camp on their journey into eternity. At last they were out of the earshot None of us could explain it then, nor can we now. Okay, Detente with a ghost. In March, this is in Maryland. In March 1964, our older son David was stricken with rheumatic fever and needed complete bed rest and plenty of peace and quiet. The mobile home in which we lived was compact and cozy, but didn't have room for that kind of care he needed while we waited for construction of our house to be finished. My parents, Margaret and Arlington Atkins, who had just purchased a rambling 10-room house on the Hudson Wharf Road near Cambridge, Maryland, solved our problem by asking us to stay with them until the carpenters could complete our place. That's when the fun began. Often as I climbed the circular front stairs, as narrow and steep as a mountain trail, I experienced a feeling of dread. As I went along the front hall, I could feel as if I had passed someone there, catching a glimpse of him or her from the corner of my eye. But I never saw any clearly defined shape or anything I could definitely call a ghost. There was only the uncomfortable sense of something. Still, I was frightened. I tried to dismiss it as nerves. After all, I was worried about my son's illness and I was living in unfamiliar surroundings. Maybe these things were exciting my imagination. I didn't even believe that for long, however. The emotional climate of the house intensified until hostility and anger. I got the impression that whatever it was, resented our presence. It was hard to explain, but if you have entered a room in which a group of people have been violently, You may have felt the anger in the air even when no words were spoken while you were there. Most people are sensitive enough to pick up these unspoken messages. Some people have more sensitive than others. I've learned that from this experience that my own reception is better than the average, but not really exceptional. One morning, as I was having coffee in the sunny L of the kitchen, my mother came down the back stairs to join me. "I made your bed while I was upstairs," she said cautiously. I was thunderstruck. "I made that bed before coming downstairs that morning, and as far as I could tell, no one had been in the room in over 3 hours." I might have believed that I was mistaken, but since having the four of us there made for so much extra housework, I tried to do as much as possible. Later that day, when I went upstairs for some clean linen, I saw that the same bed had been musted. It did not look as if it had been slept in, but as if someone had snatched up the covers and rumpled them as a child might do in a tantrum. I would have suspected my own children, except that their room was downstairs and one was too ill and the others too young to be able to climb the steps. I began to be afraid to go upstairs alone. When I told my husband about it, he did not laugh, as I had accepted, but confessed that he too often passed someone in the hall. Whenever he did, the hair on the back of his neck rose. Neither of us ever noticed anything in the first floor. My husband had my husband had never felt the anger and hostility, what I call the go away feeling. He claimed that whatever it was, it didn't frighten him. I agree that most of what I was feeling could be imaginary. I tried to do my best to believe that. I wish I had this, known then what I have since learned, that hundreds of similar cases have been documented in this country in recent years. One day, a few weeks later, as my mother and I were working in the kitchen, she suddenly asked me, "What makes you so angry with me?" Taken aback, I said, "I was not angry," but she insisted she could feel the anger crackling in the air between us. Clearly, she was getting the signals, but mistaking the source. I was angry, but someone was. How could I tell her that her newly purchased house was haunted? In the meantime, ghost anger toward us intensified. Footsteps paced louder in the hallway. Small objects, my hairbrush, my husband's key, began to disappear from our rooms. We always found them in the same place inside the closed drawer on the empty bureau in one of the front bedrooms. Sometimes we heard loud rattling noises, and always we had the feeling we were being watched, even in our most intimate moments. I had to force myself to go upstairs, and I would leave the light on in order to sleep. It took more courage than I possessed to go out into the hall and down the stairs to attend the children when they call at night. Then a few days later, as I started down the front stairs with a bundle of laundry, a hand pressed between my shoulder blades and shoved me headlong down those murderous twisting stairs. Fortunately, I caught the lintel over the stairwell and broke my fall, nearly tearing my arms from my socket in the process. The laundry landed in the front bottom with a soft plop. It was a long ways down. I managed to swing myself back and drop safely to the stairs below with a crash. As I sat there shaking all over, I could still feel the anger presence hovering over my left shoulder. Mother ran in to see what all the noise was about, and I told her I had stumbled, and she looked at me strangely but returned to the kitchen when she saw that I was unhurt. "Why?" I cried aloud. "Why do you hate me so? I haven't done anything to you." I knew she had deliberately pushed me down the stairs. She could have killed me. I wasn't even sure what it had become. She. Perhaps it was because the hand had not been cold and ghostly, but perfectly ordinary, like that, with someone standing behind me in line to the supermarket. Suddenly, the anger faded, and a wave of sympathy and understanding washed over me. I felt a touch on my left shoulder, a gentle one, and it seemed to say, "I'm sorry." And then the presence was gone, and I was back in the middle of an ordinary day. I made my way downstairs to wash the laundry, feed the baby, play chess with my older son. But I knew that sooner or later I'd have to face up to what had happened and warn my parents about the ghost. What if she tries to hurt somebody else? She never tries to hurt me again. She never tried to hurt me again. And while I often felt her presence, I was no longer so frightened. Strangely, the presence, strangely enough, she appeared to have become fond of me, following me from room to room as I did my upstairs chores. I got the impression that she was lonely and enjoyed my company. Although she continues to be hostile toward my parents, she froze up if Mother entered the room where she was. At times, she snooped around, listening at my mother's bedroom door. I wasn't certain how my parents would take it if I warned them. The repentant ghost is no more believable than any other kind. When I tried to, I did. When I did try to discuss the presence of the ghost, of course, the whole thing was treated as a joke. When I tried to be serious, no one except my husband would listen. My father flatly refused to discuss it, and everyone considered it an amusing tale. But my husband backed me up. He told them that he too had felt something. His statement was met with a fresh rout of laughter. One morning in July, when we were having coffee, the next day, the next door neighbor, Mrs. Meredith, stopped by. We asked her about the age of the house. She said her house and mother's were about the same age, and she had been living in hers ever since it was built nearly 50 years ago. She must have known my ghost. I started to tell her about the phenomena, and I had experience. Why not? By now I was used to, to ridicule. Leaving out only the incidents on the stairs, I told her the story. I added that for some reason I thought the ghosts were a woman, about 36 or older, short and gray hair, and rimless glasses that had gold earpieces. The phantom paced up and down the front hall and was angry. Sometimes the footsteps were clearly audible. She disliked that people in my mother's bedroom, although I did not feel the resentment applied so much to mother and dad as the people who had occupied the room in her lifetime. She never went into the room, which was in the L, although she sometimes followed me into my room, which was just adjacent to it. Her main experience was the front bedrooms, halls, and stairs. I said she was a possessive person who felt that the house still belonged to her, while she tolerates mother who didn't sleep in her part of the house. She resents us much more actively because we were occupying her space. Having gotten it all out at last, I felt better, although Mrs. Meredith had warned me at the outset that she didn't believe in anything supernatural. Nonetheless, she said, I know who that is. That's Bertha Sherman. Mrs. Meredith told us that Miss Bertha had rented the house soon after it was built and lived there many years. When her growing family got too large for the dwelling, the L had been added. As the years passed and her family grew up and left home, the rent became less profitable to the owner, and he decided to sell. He offered the house first to the Shermans, who could not afford to buy it, and then sold it to another couple who hoped to use it for a retirement home. The new owners felt bad about Mr. and Mrs. Sherman and hated to force them out of the house. They they had lived in for over 25 years, so they agreed to rent them in the front half of the house, keeping only the L for their own use on weekends. The agreement was that the Shermans would stay at least until new owners retired. Mrs. Sherman, who recently the new people bitterly, often made noises in her part of the house to annoy them. They slept in the bedroom now occupied by my parents. The Shermans continued to live in the house until Mrs. Sherman's death from cancer in 1931. Although they spent a lot of money on improvements, the new owners were never satisfied and the house was sold again within 6 months of their moving into full-time occupancy. Mrs. Meredith confirmed that it had changed hands often. No owners seemed to stay more than a year, and the rental tenants left even more quickly. I had I had known none of this history of the house when we went there. I had never heard of Miss Bertha Sherman or her problems, yet somehow I knew of them. Just how I knew, I'm not sure. At least every perception I'd had conformed perfectly to the fact that Miss Meredith gave us about her erstwhile neighbor, even to the physical description of the glasses she wore. The front bedroom where we usually found the missing objects had been her bedroom, and some of the furniture, including the bureau, was still in the house. She had been in the habit of pacing up and down the stairs from the hall whenever she was upset. Possessed of legendary temper, she sometimes screamed so loudly oh boy. I was left. I said she was a possessive person who felt like house still belongs to her. No, I ain't wearing that. I was over here. Okay, the front bedroom where we usually found the missing object had been the bedroom, and some of the furniture, including the bureau, was still in the house. She had been in the habit of pacing up and down the stairs whenever she was upset, possessed of legendary tempers. She sometimes screamed so loudly at her landlord that her words could be heard next door. How well I knew that temper. I could still feel that hand between my shoulder blades. People who thought the ghost was a figment of my imagination were surprised that she disappeared when we moved into our own home. But Miss Bertha is still there. Others have heard her in the front hall and on the stairs. She slams doors, opens them too, especially when someone is undressing. She even bounced up and down on the bed while one of Mother's house guests was trying to sleep. Well, it isn't every ghost who develops such a sense of humor, and although she has become something of a practical joker, at least most of the anger and the malevolence has disappeared. She seems more respectful to house guests these days, even to the point of tucking in the children's covers when they visit for an occasional weekend. And why shouldn't she? She had plenty of practice. She raised 5 children of her own in her house. Hmm.
You getting ready for bed? Gary,
I'm cutting down.
are you getting ready for bed? You could answer it to her.
Yeah, we can go to bed.
Well, you weren't planning on